Hey there, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're strapping on our metaphorical time-traveling boots and venturing back to early human history.
That's right.
But forget those dusty old textbooks.
Get ready to explore ecogynocentrism.
Okay, ecogynocentrism.
It's a theory that challenges pretty much everything you thought you knew about the roles of men and women in prehistoric societies.
It's one of those words that sounds way more complicated than it really is.
Think of it like this.
Think of it like this. Gynocentrism means centered around women.
And eco obviously refers to the environment.
So we're talking about societies where women weren't just respected, they were the leaders.
All while existing in deep harmony with nature.
And what's even wilder is that our source material for this deep dive suggests this wasn't some fringe movement. It might have been the norm for a huge chunk of human history.
Precisely. We're delving into a book called Cyborgs versus the Earth Goddess.
And let me tell you,
It makes some bold claims.
the author.
The author argues that for the vast majority of human existence, societies were structured around women, with a focus on cooperation, sustainability, and reverence for the earth.
I have to admit, when I first saw the title, that whole Cyborgs versus the Earth Goddess thing had me picturing Arnold Schwarzenegger battling Mother Nature.
It definitely grabs your attention.
It's not exactly your typical history book title.
But once you get past the sci-fi imagery, you realize the author is using cyborg as a metaphor.
Okay.
It represents this mindset that emerged later in human history, one obsessed with dominance, control over nature, and technological advancement.
Even if it means harming the environment.
Think less Terminator, more. Well, we'll get into that.
Okay, so instead of being one with nature, it's about conquering it. I'm already sensing some uncomfortable parallels to today's world.
You're picking up what the book is putting down. The author suggests that this cyborg mentality is ultimately what led to things like patriarchy, rigid social hierarchies, and even the environmental problems we face today.
Wow.
Uh,
So we've got these two opposing forces, the Earth Goddess representing a harmonious way of life.
and the cyborg representing a more exploitative one.
Before we get into how we supposedly went from point A to point B,
Let's rewind to the beginning.
what does the book say about those early Earth Goddess worshipping societies?
The book focuses heavily on the Paleolithic era. You probably know it as the Stone Age.
It was a time when hunting and gathering were the only ways to survive.
Now, most of us picture our ancestors chasing woolly mammoths across the tundra, right?
But,
So the book argues that this focus on hunting,
and by extension,
and by extension man the hunter, has led to a skewed understanding of how these societies actually functioned.
hold on.
Are you saying that the whole man the hunter thing is overblown? What about all those cave paintings of dudes with spears?
Those paintings exist for sure, but remember, they only give us a snapshot of life back then.
The book.
The book argues that for the vast majority of human history, gathering, which was primarily done by women, provided the bulk of our food.
Imagine, for hundreds of thousands of years, plant foods made up the bulk of the human diet. We're talking fruits, roots, nuts, all that good stuff.
And remember, finding those berries wasn't just about luck. It required deep knowledge of the land, the seasons, plant cycles. The book suggests that this intimate connection to the earth, to providing for their communities, is what gave women a position of influence.
So it's not just about who's bringing home dinner. It's about who understands how to keep the dinner coming, season after season.
That makes sense.
But is there any physical evidence to support this? Or is it just speculation based on what we know about hunter-gatherer life?
This is where it gets really interesting. The book points to the abundance of Earth Goddess figurines found at archaeological sites all over the world.
You know the ones I'm talking about?
You know the ones I'm talking about? Those curvy, voluptuous figures representing fertility and abundance?
They're not exactly subtle.
Oh yeah, those definitely made an impression in my art history class.
But I always thought they were just, art.
Is the author saying there's more to it?
The book argues that these figurines weren't just random artistic expressions, but representations of a deeply held belief system.
Remember?
Remember, we're talking of a time long before written language.
These figures.
These figures, according to the book, served as powerful symbols of female power, fertility, and the life-giving forces of nature.
They weren't worshiping a goddess in the traditional sense.
It was more about recognizing the feminine principle as the source of all life.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection.
These weren't just pieces of art. They were symbols of a whole different way of seeing the world.
But if these Earth Goddess worshipping gatherer societies were so idyllic, what happened?
Yeah.
How did we go from that to Well, everything we see around us now.
That's the million-dollar question. The book pins the blame, or at least a significant portion of it, on one key development: the domestication of animals. This, according to the author, marked a turning point where humans,
Particularly men.
started seeing themselves as separate from and superior to nature instead of a part of it.
Wait, so taming a wild animal somehow messed everything up. That's quite a leap. How does the author connect those dots?
It's a fascinating argument.
The book.
The book digs into how, before domestication, humans would have viewed animals with a mix of awe and fear.
They were respected, even revered.
But also recognized as powerful beings in their own right.
But once humans,
particularly men, figured out how to control these animals.
to breed them and use them for their own purposes.
It sparked a shift in thinking.
Suddenly.
Suddenly, humans weren't just a part of the natural order, they were above it.
So instead of living in harmony with nature, it became all about control. I'm sensing a theme here.
You got it. And this desire for control, according to the book, didn't just stop with animals.
It eventually extended to other aspects of life, including, well, women.
Okay, that's where I need a little more convincing.
To go from domesticating animals to the rise of patriarchy seems like a big leap.
Does the book provide any evidence to support this claim?
It does attempt to draw some connections. For instance, it highlights the rise of agriculture.
Now,
on the surface, agriculture might seem like a positive development.
who doesn't love a steady food supply?
But it also led to more sedentary lifestyles and increased competition for land and resources. Which, historically speaking, often leads to conflict, right? And as those conflicts arose,
the author suggests, so too did a more hierarchical, male-dominated social structure.
think about it.
If you're a society suddenly dependent on farming,
And men are the ones traditionally doing the farming.
it stands to reason that they would start to accumulate more power and control.
Okay, that tracks logically.
But I still have a hard time believing that simply switching from gathering berries to planting crops could lead to such a drastic societal shift.
You're right to be skeptical. And to be fair, the book acknowledges that this is a complex issue with many contributing factors, but it argues that agriculture was a catalyst.
It shifted humanity's relationship with nature from one of interdependence to one of dominance.
And that, according to the author, had ripple effects on every aspect of human society.
It even affected how we viewed ourselves in relation to the divine.
Wait, what does religion have to do with all of this? We're talking about farming, not faith.
Bear with me, because this is where the book really starts to connect the dots.
Remember all those earth goddess figures we talked about?
Well, as societies moved away from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle and embraced agriculture, there was a shift in religious beliefs as well.
Go on.
Instead of those curvy, fertile figures representing the Earth Mother, we start to see the emergence of male deities.
And these aren't your gentle, nature-loving gods either.
These are gods of war, of thunder, of conquest.
Sound familiar?
Okay, yeah, I think I see where you're going with this.
It's like the whole cyborg mentality is starting to take shape in religion, too.
Instead of a reverence for the natural world, it's all about dominance and control.
Exactly. And the book argues that this shift in religious beliefs is directly tied to the rise of patriarchy.
As men began to accumulate more power and influence in society,
so too did their gods.
This is blowing my mind. I never realized how interconnected all of this is.
But hold on, before we get too deep into the rise of patriarchal gods,
I want to go back to something you said earlier.
You mentioned that the book attempts to support its claims with evidence beyond just pointing to the shift from gathering to agriculture.
What else does the author use to back up this whole cyborg versus earth goddess theory?
The book is actually surprisingly well-researched.
It draws on evidence from a variety of fields.
Including anthropology, archaeology, mythology, and even primate behavior.
Primate behavior, like monkeys and apes. What do they have to do with any of this?
You'd be surprised. One of the book's most compelling arguments involves looking at our closest living relatives, the great apes.
Specifically bonobos.
Bonobos.
Those are the ones who are always...
How do I put this delicately?
Engaging in, shall we say, friendly activities.
That's the stereotype, yes. But what's often overlooked is that bonobos also live in a mostly peaceful, egalitarian society where females hold a surprising amount of power.
Wait, really? Female-led chimpanzees.
It's not the image we usually get.
I always pictured them as being pretty. Well, patriarchal, just like their close relatives, the chimpanzees.
But the book highlights the fact that female bonobos often form strong alliances and play a significant role in maintaining social order within their groups. If our closest primate relatives don't necessarily fit the male dominance's natural narrative, maybe that idea should be questioned more when it comes to human history, too.
Are you saying that patriarchy isn't some inevitable force of nature?
That's exactly what the book is suggesting. And it uses the bonobos as a prime example of how social structures and power dynamics can vary widely, even among closely related species.
Now, I'm really starting to see why this book is considered so thought-provoking. It's challenging some very fundamental ideas about human nature and society.
It definitely gets the wheels turning. And we're just scratching the surface.
There's a lot more to unpack here.
Well, lucky for us, that's what the deep dive is all about. But for now, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into this fascinating exploration of ecogynocentrism.
Stay tuned.
It's fascinating to consider how those ancient societies, the ones who worshipped the Earth Mother and lived in harmony with nature, how they viewed the world.
It's almost like we can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like to see nature not as something to be conquered, but as something sacred.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is that these weren't just isolated groups of people. The book argues that this reverence for the feminine and for nature was widespread, spanning across continents and cultures for millennia.
Okay, so if this way of life, this earth goddess worldview, was so dominant for so long, what happened? How did we get from that to, well, to the world we live in now, a world where we're facing a climate crisis and struggling with rampant inequality?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the book doesn't offer any easy answers, but it does suggest that understanding how we got here is crucial if we want to find a better way forward.
So it's not about placing blame. It's about understanding the root causes of the problems we face today.
Precisely. And the book argues that one of those root causes is the shift in mindset that we've been talking about, from a worldview centered on harmony and interconnection to one that prioritizes control and domination.
That cyborg mentality.
Exactly. And the book traces this shift back to a series of historical developments, starting with the domestication of animals and the rise of agriculture, which then paved the way for more complex societies, hierarchical structures, and ultimately the systems of oppression and exploitation that we see today.
It's amazing to think about how these seemingly disparate events, the taming of a wild animal, the planting of a seed, could have such far-reaching consequences.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of everything, doesn't it? How one seemingly small change can ripple out and transform the world in ways we can't even begin to imagine.
It's almost like a butterfly effect for human history.
Exactly. And the book argues that this shift in mindset wasn't just limited to our relationship with the natural world, it also extended to our relationships with each other, particularly between men and women.
We touched on this earlier, the idea that the domestication of animals might have paved the way for the domination of women. But how exactly does the author support that claim?
Well, the book delves into the concept of ownership, which became increasingly important with the rise of agriculture and settled communities.
Because if you're planting crops and building permanent structures, you need to establish who owns what.
Exactly. And as land and resources became more valuable, control over those resources became a source of power. And in many cultures, that power was concentrated in the hands of men.
So it's not necessarily that men deliberately set out to dominate women. It's more like the systems that emerged during this period, systems based on ownership and control, naturally favored them.
That's the argument the book makes. It's not about individual men being inherently bad or power hungry. It's about the systems that were put in place, systems that created an imbalance of power that has persisted for centuries.
So it's like that saying, the system isn't broken, it was built this way.
Exactly. And the book challenges us to examine these systems to understand how they came to be and how they continue to shape our world today.
So it's not just about looking back at the past with a critical eye. It's about using that understanding to create a better future.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important aspect of the book. Its exploration of the divine feminine, the archetype of the earth goddess, not as some mythical figure from a distant past, but as a potent symbol of the values we've lost touch with: balance, harmony, reverence for life.
You know, we talked earlier about how those ancient earth goddess figurines have been found all over the world. But the book also explores how this archetype manifests in different cultures and throughout history, right?
Absolutely. It delves into various mythologies and spiritual traditions, highlighting the recurring theme of a powerful female deity associated with nature, fertility, and creation.
It's like this archetype is embedded in our collective unconscious, a reminder of a time when humanity lived in greater harmony with itself and with the earth.
And the book seems to suggest that by reconnecting with this archetype, by embracing the values it represents, we can begin to heal the wounds of patriarchy and create a more just and sustainable world.
So it's not just about looking back nostalgically at a lost golden age. It's about reclaiming those values and integrating them into our modern lives.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the wisdom of those ancient earth goddess-worshipping societies is still relevant today, perhaps even more so given the challenges we face.
It's about understanding that the path to a better future might just lie in rediscovering the wisdom of our past.
And that, my friend, is a journey worth taking.
You know, for a book about prehistoric times and ancient archetypes, this conversation feels surprisingly relevant to our modern world. But there's one aspect of the cyborg metaphor that we haven't really touched on yet,
Yeah.
technology.
That's right. It's almost too perfect, isn't it? This idea of the cyborg representing a disconnect from nature and a reliance on technology.
It's like we're living in the future the book warned us about. But seriously, I'm curious to know what the author has to say about our relationship with technology. Is it all doom and gloom? Or is there a way to reconcile our love of gadgets with a more harmonious way of life?
Well, the book doesn't shy away from the potential dangers of technology. It argues that the same drive for control and domination that led to the exploitation of nature has also fueled our technological advancements, often with disastrous consequences for the planet and for marginalized communities.
Yeah, I mean, you can't talk about technology without acknowledging things like climate change, resource depletion, and the exploitation of workers in the tech industry.
Exactly. But the book doesn't paint technology as inherently bad either. It acknowledges that technology can be a powerful tool for good, for connecting with each other, for accessing information, and even for promoting environmental sustainability.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether. It's about using it more consciously and responsibly.
Exactly. The book argues that we need to find a balance, a way to harness the power of technology without letting it control us or disconnect us from the natural world.
Which is easier said than done, right? I mean, we live in a world where technology is constantly evolving, where there's always a new gadget or app vying for our attention.
It's definitely a challenge, but the book suggests that it starts with awareness, with asking ourselves critical questions about the technologies we use and the values they embody.
Like, who is this technology benefiting? What are the potential downsides? And most importantly, is this technology aligned with the kind of world we want to create?
Exactly. And I think that's where the architect of the Earth Goddess can be so powerful. It reminds us that progress doesn't have to come at the expense of the planet or each other. It's about finding a way to live in harmony, to use technology in a way that supports life, not destroys it.
It's about bridging the gap between the ancient wisdom of the Earth Goddess and the modern advancements of the digital age.
And who knows, maybe that's the key to creating a future where both humanity and nature can thrive.
It's a vision worth striving for sure. And speaking of visions, this book has definitely given us a lot to think about. But before we wrap up, I did want to touch on one more aspect that I found particularly interesting.
I'm all ears.
The author's background. It's not every day that you come across a book about ecogynocentrism, about the divine feminine, written by well, let's just say it, a man.
You're right, that is unusual. And the author actually addresses this directly in the book's introduction.
He does. What does he have to say about it? I have to admit, I'm a little curious to know how a man came to write a book about a topic that's so often associated with feminist theory and women's spirituality.
Well, he talks about his own journey of discovery, how his research into ancient cultures and his growing awareness of the environmental crisis led him to question the dominant patriarchal narratives he'd always accepted.
So it was a personal transformation as much as an intellectual one.
Exactly. And he also acknowledges the potential for bias given his own positionality as a male author writing about a topic that's often been marginalized and silenced.
It takes a certain level of self-awareness to acknowledge that, to recognize that his own experiences and perspectives might shape the way he approaches the subject matter.
Absolutely. And he's very upfront about that, encouraging readers to engage critically with his work, to challenge his assumptions, and to bring their own perspectives to the table.
I appreciate that. It would be easy for him to shy away from those uncomfortable conversations about power and privilege. But instead, he leans into them, inviting readers to join him in a more nuanced and honest exploration of these complex issues.
I think that's one of the things I admire most about the book, its willingness to engage with difficult questions, to challenge the status quo, and to spark meaningful conversations. But perhaps even more importantly, the author seems to have a genuine desire to learn and to grow, recognizing that he doesn't have all the answers.
Which, let's be honest, is refreshing. It's not every day you come across an author, especially a male author, writing about a topic like this, who is willing to admit that he doesn't have all the answers, that he's still on a journey of discovery.
It's a welcome change, for sure, and I think it speaks to the book's overall message of humility, of recognizing that we're all in this together and that we have a lot to learn from each other, from the past and from the natural world.
Well said. And speaking of learning, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about earth goddesses, cyborgs, the domestication of animals, the impact of agriculture, and the complex relationship between technology and the natural world. It's been quite a journey.
It really has, and yet I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating and thought-provoking topic.
That's the beauty of a deep dive. It's not about providing all the answers. It's about sparking curiosity and inspiring further exploration. It's true. There's always more to uncover, more to ponder. And while we've explored many different facets of the book, I think the real power of this book and this conversation is that it challenges us to think differently.
To question the stories we've been told about ourselves, about our history, about our place in the world.
Exactly. It's like the author is handing us a new pair of glasses and saying, here, try these on, see the world from this perspective for a while.
And what's amazing is that when you do try on those glasses, when you start to look at the world through the lens of ecogynocentrism, you realize that it's not just an academic theory.
It's a call to action.
It is. It's about recognizing that we have a choice to make. We can continue down the path we're on, the path of domination and exploitation, or we can choose a different way.
A way that honors the interconnectedness of all things. A way that recognizes the sacredness of the earth and all its inhabitants.
A way that embraces the feminine principles of cooperation, compassion, and care.
You know, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the challenges we face, from climate change to social injustice to the erosion of democracy.
It's true. These are complex, systemic issues, and there's no quick fix.
But I think the book offers a glimmer of hope. It reminds us that change is possible, that it starts with each of us, and that even small acts of resistance can have a ripple effect.
And that's what I love about this concept of ecogynocentrism. It's not about waiting for someone else to save us. It's about recognizing the power we each have to create a better world.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired, who are wondering what they can do to bring a little more Earth Goddess energy into their own lives, we wanted to offer a challenge.
A deep dive challenge. I like it.
We've spent this entire episode talking about big ideas, historical shifts, ancient archetypes. But what does it look like to actually embody these principles in our daily lives?
That's the real question, isn't it?
So here's our challenge to you. This week, we encourage you to think about one small, concrete action you can take that aligns with the values we've been discussing.
It could be something as simple as spending time in nature, really connecting with the sights, sounds, and smells of the natural world.
Or maybe it's about making a conscious effort to reduce your environmental impact, like choosing reusable products over single-use plastics, or cutting back on your meat consumption.
It could even be about examining your own biases and challenging patriarchal norms in your own sphere of influence.
The point is, there are countless ways to bring a little more balance, a little more harmony, a little more Earth Goddess energy into the world.
And who knows? Maybe if enough of us start making those small changes, they'll add up to something truly transformative.
It's a beautiful vision,
Yeah.
and one that I think is worth striving for.
Absolutely. And that's what this deep dive has been all about. Exploring new perspectives, challenging old assumptions, and remembering that a different world is possible.
If we dare to imagine it, and if we're brave enough to create it. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and above all, keep diving deep.
See you in the depths.
Bye, everyone.